Hello Seekers, welcome to this next video on my series of the science of consciousness. I have this very basic visualization today to explain to you as fast as possible my view on the consciousness-only model, which is the way in which we can perceive reality and understand reality from an experiential standpoint, that everything is one. And so this video, even though I may mention a couple of metaphysic things or philosophical, is not derived from any of these teachings or understandings. The thing that I love the most about this is that it is derived from the experience of the being itself, of simply being. So because you may be familiar with some of these concepts, I'm going to try to fit in a couple of them, but the general model goes this way. We have to start with the singularity, or at least that's the word that I decided to use for the point in which everything is. Everything that we know exists because it's part of this singularity. Now, I'll get to that in a moment on how it feels, what it is that is the singularity in all of us. But the important part, because we're always interested in this manifestation of reality, is that singularity projects, as it were, reality. It is a projection of the singularity, all that exists. And to that I call the mind. The mind is everything that is in movement, in motion. It is changing, it's transforming, it is growing, it's evolving. That is what the mind is. And so in this model, the first thing we need to know is that this is the starting point. This is the singularity in which everything comes out. Because we're interested, of course, in consciousness, that is what we are studying here, we know that this is the singularity of consciousness. And we'll check that in a minute, like I said. So everything that we see as the mind is movement, is the sensation of activity. And so from here, there is a spectrum in which consciousness can feel in unity or in separation. That is the game that it plays in the dual aspect of separation. Now, in the activity of the mind, there exists the callback to identity, or rather, there is always the presence of needing to identify the self. This is the key, or rather, this is the cue for the being to start its recognition of itself. That starts with the human. The human has the capability of answering the question, who am I? And so from this point, we begin the exploration inwardly. Now, when we go inwardly from the separation, this is the longest point of separation, if I can visualize it in one way, and that would be the human being. I know some of you may be thinking about the elements and animals and plants, but I won't get that in here because I'm trying to explain the perception of the human. The perception of the human is the most separate one that exists. Feeling that is a body that is going to decay and die, and it's never going to exist again. So it's its own iteration of reality. It's just, this is all that exists, the human body. Here, what I am. And so this is what we see as the projection of the separate self. It comes from the mind. It comes from the natural feeling of identity that the singularity is, as we'll get in a minute, and you'll see why there is this sense of identity at the core of our being. Is the only thing that we know is that we are. Trying to explore this we are, or I am, is what either goes externally into saying I am this being that needs to survive and take care of himself, or it goes inwardly into saying, finally, who I am. So I kind of got the cat out of the bag at that point. But so far what we have is that the separate self is the manifestation of this a need for understanding who we are. And because we feel separate here in this body, we feel that the only thing I can feel and think and touch and perceive is this body and this mind, then I must be a separate individual. And so this separate self is really an illusory part of the mind, or rather of identity, with the activity of the mind. Because like I said, The mind is simply activity. It is what we are used to. And so, because we haven't explored the singularity, which I would start now calling consciousness or awareness, this awareness is what contains everything. And you'll see it in a second. Because when the mind has thoughts of separation, it feels ever more separate from everything. When the mind begins to realize that there is more unity in whichever way possible, it doesn't matter. There are so many ways into feeling the sense of unity. And that's why the mind can actually return to home or return to its source, start this journey back to its source in so many different ways. This is the infinite potentials of one going back to source. Now, this source is always the same. Otherwise, we couldn't call it consciousness-only model. And you will see why the reason of calling it consciousness-only model exists, which again is maybe to elaborate a little bit more in other videos or in conversations or in questions and answers, which is really the best methodology that we have to incite this inner knowledge that doesn't come from books, it doesn't come from a video like this, it doesn't come from anything but from pure experience. But when the mind starts having thoughts of unity, it starts this call back. Now, this is a very important point to mention that before even getting into what meditation is meant to be. Anything that we experience is part of the mind and not of singularity or consciousness or awareness. Everything that we explore in our minds is still part of singularity or consciousness exploring itself within the mind. This includes the astral planes, the densities of consciousness, the perception of different beings and all separate angels and so forth. All of these iterations of the mind, which can take infinite forms. It only takes imagination. And of course, imagination, I don't mean this in a pejorative way, as we were told when we were kids, not to pay attention to our imagination, but I mean imagination as the core of drawing reality, of painting reality. And so we are able to explore ourselves within the mind, because the mind is what perceives everything. It is the refraction of the light, if you want to call it that. I wouldn't call it light, but it's the refraction of consciousness, really, that creates the possibility of light and mind. And so when the mind goes back to its source, it gradually divests itself from all its identities and it stays dormant. It actually obliterates itself. And in singularity, there is no thought, there is no action, there is nothing, because in the singularity or in awareness, there is no quality. There's only awareness. And awareness, we can even substitute it for presence or existence. Everything has presence in the universe. So for that to have presence, it must share the same quality as my sense of self. My sense of self is what tells me that I have presence. And so the presence is derived from myself. And when I explore this, I find that my presence has no qualities. It simply is. It does have qualities when I invest some sort of thoughts into it, or images, or any sort of qualities that I give to it. But see, in my method, which is not really my method, but my preferred method to explore this, because it's just the most direct way to do this, I separate these two, which is the singularity from the mind, or consciousness, awareness. This is the most efficient way to feel what it is to be simply aware, to have no thoughts, to have no mind, to go straight into what we call identity, the self. And so when we spend enough time here, we start seeing that there's a difference in how we identify ourselves. We start to see the mind as something that is simply being projected from myself. You start losing all your identities and so on. I won't give the details as to what happens because I don't think that's important. The only thing that is important to know is that we as modern humans, we haven't spent enough time, if anything, right here in the presence of ourselves, recognizing who we are. We have spent the vast majority of our time in the separate self. And that is the one that constructs the ego, or rather the ego is a synonym for the separate self. The ego is that which we identify as the self, and it's illusory. It's not real. It's based on activity, and it's not the mind. I mean, consciousness or awareness, in the sense of who we truly are. It is consciousness or awareness in movement, in action. It is the activity of consciousness. Mind is the activity of consciousness, but consciousness in and of itself is simply is. There's nothing else to it. So the invitation of this video actually is rather to bring any sort of practice, contemplation, meditation, you name it, whatever name you want to give to it, into just self-inquiry. Go into the presence of your own self, to explore there. The mind may be conditioned to say, no, that's too boring. I don't want to spend much time there. It's just, you know, I want to keep thinking this way. And the mind is conditioned to be that way. But this is what we call discipline, disciplines of the mind. We start to simply observe the mind. We're not trying to push the mind, because who's there to push it? Nobody. You are simply presence. So this practice starts to give, we haven't even begun to explore the implications of staying here daily for long periods of time, just simply staying with the self. When you start to do this, life changes. There's no need to do activities. There are many ways in which we can realize this, for sure. There are many ways that are arduous, and they are rigorous training to discipline the mind, to calm the mind so we get there. But we can actually get there right like this, because we can just go and say, I am aware, and I'm just going to explore this feeling or this presence that I am. I'm just going to not even explore, I'm just going to remain in my own presence. That is the key of meditation. And it is the self. When you realize and you ask the question, who am I? The only place you can go back to is this. And so this is the best way I can actually briefly describe what is the consciousness only model. And like I said, this is probably better talked in a dialogue or in, I don't think videos do much honor, or books and so on. This is not about information. This is about exploring with the person. So that's it. That's all I got today. I hope this was helpful to help you understand a little bit more the consciousness only model, which is really what exists. And from here, like I said, the implications are huge, but it starts here. You need to start recognizing that you're not this activity, that the real you, the absolute self, is really that presence that you are. Again, I hope it was useful for you. I have nothing else to say, but thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.